In the language of the land, Taba Namuna, good morning to all of you, for those of you in person and those joining us via Zoom this morning. It gives me great pleasure to be able to talk to you about our learnings and an interesting topic, which is preparing communities for life after oil and gas. So I'd like to firstly acknowledge my colleagues that are working in the Community Affairs and External Affairs department at Oil Search, some of you who may be in the room today, and just acknowledging the hard work and contributions that I've made over the years in terms of working with communities. So just a disclaimer there. Next slide, please. Okay, just a quick overview of my presentation. So I'll provide a bit of context around our footprint area, the Oil Search project footprint area. Briefly mention state statutory benefits relating to benefits paid to landowners and the state. And then I'll dive into Oil Search's social development investments, particularly in terms of supporting our communities for the future. We'll look at a particular example of the work we're doing in Gobi and look at the Gobi Sustainable Development Plan. And at the end, just looking forward in terms of what we want to do in the sustainable development space, building on the work that we've been doing in the past. Okay, so in terms of a context of and the background of where we work, the next slide, please. So it's just a map, and I apologize that it's kind of fuzzy, particularly the details and the names of places. So it just focuses on our Oil Search project footprint area, which is essentially covering about 1 million hectares of land, production and pipeline licenses, retention and exploration licenses, 6 producing oil fields, 1 producing gas field, and major gas development opportunities. Interestingly, on this map, just showing you the social diversity, we're traversing 3 provinces, Hela, Southern Highlands, and Gulf, and also covering 8 local level government areas, 13 distinct language groups, with a resident project area population of about 35,000 plus. So I guess in terms of the complexity of the diversity and working with each of these different landowner communities. Okay, just in terms of the rationale and the why, and a lot of the speakers have mentioned it, we all want to work towards helping, improving, supporting communities for a future state. But what's the background? What's the context? Why are we doing what we're doing? So there's a number of limitations in terms of the sustainable and social development context, where we're working in relation to access to services, funding sources and funding streams from the government, or the service improvement funding from the provincial and local level governments. As I mentioned, the access to services, including state land for future development activities, if you're going to build townships or economic hubs, and all the other related amenities. What we're finding is there's a high dependency on oil and gas income streams. So essentially at grassroots level, there's limited economic development opportunities for women and for the youth as well. There's a rising number, or there's a huge youth population that don't have opportunities to participate in the economic or small business environment. Health indicators, which were much lower than other parts of the country when we started working in the area, and there continues to be challenges with working in improving our health systems in the areas that we work in. Limited participation of women, certainly, and youth in decision making, perhaps sitting on boards and at the ward and LLG level. I think one area is that an area that we need perhaps to focus on more is just the coordination between all the stakeholders, and that means between the developer, between peers in the industry, the government, and other service providers as well. The high levels of conflict and violence, including gender-based violence and law and order issues, are some of the challenges that continue to challenge what we do in the sustainable development space. One that's of great concern to us is the education outcomes in the 3 of the provinces that we work in. With the low literacy levels and low transition rates of young people from our schools into technical and tertiary institutions is a concern for us, and which kind of leads to high levels of unemployment and unskilled youths that remain that are in our project impact area. So that these are areas of concern for us. All these points are put down is based on data that we've collected over the years and more recently from the various social economic impact assessments and studies. So I guess the big question of how do we prepare communities for life after oil and gas? And so what I'm sharing is from lessons that we've learned over the years. And so in terms of our sustainability planning process, and this is to do with communities in particular, landowner communities, it starts with the end in mind of building towards a future that is a future sustainable state. So different groups would have perhaps different expectations of what a future state might be like, understanding and views on what a future state would be like for landowner communities. Engaging with government and landowners is an important part of this process. Establishing clear performance targets so that you can regularly go back and revisit and look at your interventions. It requires a multi-stakeholder approach and strategic engagement. So it's so it's a balance between the short-term and the long-term planning. And as I mentioned, I think it's coordinated with our efforts must be coordinated with the company and other agencies so that we're complementary and not building sort of parallel systems that are not talking to each other. Okay, so importantly that we utilize the present income streams from all the stakeholders. It's not just the developer, but all stakeholders to plan for and invest in this futuristic state. Building capability, bringing people along, whether it's your internal staff capability or the communities that you work with, your partners is very important. And it also addresses how we improve ways of working with our communities. A key point that we're very much aware of and always constantly thinking about is there's a very real possibility that these communities could revert back to a pre-petroleum project way of life, meaning, in the absence of the medical services that we provide, the maintenance and upkeeps of road and infrastructure and other services that the industry contributes to supporting communities. Next slide. So briefly touch on statutory benefits. This is covered I think in a number of presentations, so I won't go into detail. So interestingly, the oil and gas is considered to be one of the best sets of petroleum legislations in the world, given that it is both comprehensive and inclusive. So it's providing for traditional landowners that are host to the resources. So with all its intent and purposes, the benefits to the state and landowners are for the purpose of improving livelihoods, infrastructure, and well-being of people in the project impact areas as a whole. So, and the preamble of the PNG Oil and Gas Act describes that very well. Next, please. So with the statutory benefits and how we support that, obviously by producing and selling hydrocarbons from the project development area, it's creating value and generates revenue for the state and the landowners. I think it's an interesting area for us, just supporting the government. So while we pay the various statutory benefits to the state from the revenues generated, and then through DPE, who then distributes these benefits to the appropriate recipients or the management mechanism, I think an area of interest for us and concern for us and priority is when the distribution doesn't meet, I guess, the community and national expectations. And so supporting the government to meet its obligations to distribute the revenues, whether they be cash and non-cash, is always a priority for us. Okay, so we play that supportive role. So I'll just dive into the social development investments and how we support and help to prepare communities. As I mentioned, it's a balance between short-term support that we provide, whether it be disaster relief and donations, but also focusing on longer-term sustainable development programs. So we're guided by our sustainable communities policy. It's integrated with our broader business objectives. In fact, one of the 7 pillars of the overall corporate sustainability strategy focuses on community. So we commit to open and transparent engagement with government and NGOs. And we're seeking that that balance between short-term versus long-term planning for sustainable development. Okay, next, please. Okay, in the business development space, local content, we've certainly learned lessons since takeover from Chevron, and want to use these lessons to drive change. And in fact, we have immense opportunity to drive change, and the work that we do in this space helps to address Section 129 of the Oil and Gas Act, which relates to local purchase obligations. So historically, we've supported landco companies in terms of building the foundations, business structures, systems, providing training, and also just continually supporting with compliance monitoring. By that I mean landowner compliance to regulations set by the IPA, IRC, and superannuation, etc. So this is what we've done historically. We've been impacted not just in the business development space, but in other areas as well since February 2019 by the COVID pandemic. So it's had an impact on how we work with our landowners, companies, and also by the fall in the oil prices. So between 2010 to 2020, we have about 700 million US dollars, about 2 billion PNG Kina has paid to the in contracts to landowner companies. So this represents about 35% of the payments that's made to PNG's suppliers and contractors. So there's a lot of work still to be done, working with our landowner companies, and in 2020 we revised our forward landco business development approach. In terms of the outcomes, what do we want to achieve out of the work that we do in business development? And it's really about the benefits cascade, from the landcos down to the communities. Increasing, I guess, helping the landco companies to be financially viable outside of a relationship with Oil Search. And, part of that means, supporting them to diversify their business. Thank you. Next. Okay, with the Oil Search Foundation, Oil Search Foundation, we are the principal donor, and the foundation plays a significant role, certainly in the health sector in the 3 provinces of Hela, Southern Highlands, and Gulf. There's a lot of work to be done in the health space, and more recently we moved away from just service delivery to really focus on institutional, strengthening institutional capacity. So we have partnership agreements with the Department of Health and the 3 PHAs of Hela, Southern Highlands, and Gulf, and we have representation on the boards of these provincial health authorities. So just the bullet points up there, just highlighting the different areas that we support our health facilities in the project impact area. Okay, in the education space, and as I highlighted in the context, education is one area that we're really concerned about and focus a lot of our efforts really to help elevate the profile of having a good education and the importance of having that good education starting from early childhood right through to I guess tertiary level. There are over 120 schools that are in our catchment area, and since 1996, which also captures the data from Chevron, we have put in 19 million kina into sponsorships, over 19 million kina, and sponsored about 2,500 students. So there's a number of other areas that we support in the academic, in the education space. Particular interest to us is improving classrooms and teachers' houses, because it's important for teacher retention, and also looking at upgrading primary teacher qualifications from certificate to diploma. So it's really important to have good teachers and be able to retain them, attract them to work in these places, so we can contribute to improving education outcomes. In terms of forward looking and what we want to do in the future, is really supporting with, I guess, a more holistic approach on improving education outcomes in these areas by working with schools to improve school learning improvement plans or SLEEP. Thank you. In the community development space, there's 3 categories of community area projects and donations that covers a wide range of support that we provide to communities. So, and I've been bulleted up there. An interesting area that we're now getting into is really beefing up on our sustainable livelihoods programs. So we cover a broad range of areas: churches, church buildings, and sports. And so there's too many to be able to highlight that, but yeah, just as a summary, those are the areas that we support. Okay, so we'll dive into a particular, an example of, look at a specific example of how we supporting communities preparing for life after oil and gas, and we'll look at Gobe, where the project is reaching its end of life. And so as part of our social performance and forming part of our social performance framework, we conducted a number of studies, impact studies and baselines in 2018 and 19, arriving at a sustainable development plan, part 1 of which is a community and economic transition plan, and the second part is a land court transition plan. And it's now in implementation. Obviously, COVID-19 restrictions have impacted on our delivery of this plan. Yes, to form the Sustainable Development Plan for Gobi, we did a number of engagements at community level, baseline surveys and needs identification with communities. Just really asking, what is it you want to work on in terms of a future that's not dependent on oil and gas. So really engaging with at community level to ask the hard questions, if you like. So out of that exercise, three priority areas were identified. First off the rank was commercial agriculture development, small and medium enterprise, and really supporting the education program, particularly in Gobi, in Sambarigi, sorry. So 3 areas that are top priority in the Sustainable Development Plan. I'll talk to the agriculture focus area. Next. Okay, so what a fresh produce project, whilst we've supported over the years, supported these communities with agriculture training and inputs, this project focuses on really working outside of perhaps creating a separate value chain. Currently, it's focused on supplying vegetables to the catering company. How do we support the farmers and the communities to look at opportunities outside of the oil and gas industry? So we factor that into this project. It looks at the engagement and awareness and really identifying what they want to plant, you know, and what they want to grow and what they can grow in the communities, establishing the model farms, building the farmer capabilities, obviously for commercial agriculture, and strengthening, I guess, the ecosystem. If you were going to have a separate income generator sort of system, what would it look like outside of the oil and gas industry? And therefore creating that sustainable value chain, and obviously having a road that will help you access the Highlands Highway or transport your produce is an important one for that. Okay, just quickly some updates. So with COVID, there's been we've had slow traction on delivery of the Sustainable Development Plan, but we've certainly completed all our engagements and identified what people want to plant and grow. We have a tripartite arrangement between the landowner company and caterer PNG MPHS, Fresh Produce Development Agency, and Oil Search that's working to in partnership to deliver this project. So as I speak, there's equipment that's sitting up in Gobi waiting to be delivered to communities to set up the model farms. And we have some progress on the remaining 12 kilometers of the Erave Sambarigi road. So obviously helping our farmers to connect to other markets is important. So just thought we'd highlight that. Also, we've been able to secure some land within Sambarigi Station for the education projects. Just briefly, I'll talk about our community investment strategy and just in terms of our forward plans of what we want to do. And it's, again, as I mentioned, it's building on our experiences and learning from the past. So we want to focus on peace and good order, which is very important, education, as I said, community health, and sustainable livelihood. So just in terms of the approach, we want to heighten our engagement with government and our peers and other service providers. We want to provide more opportunities for training and development and just being inclusive, bringing everybody along on the journey, leaving no one behind. We want to allow communities to establish their own networks and linkages, not just our networks and linkages, but identifying what's good for them, what's going to work for them with key stakeholders. And I guess we have a heightened focus on resilience in every sense of the word. Okay, so to conclude, as I said in my opening comments, sustainable development planning is a process. If I could use that proverb, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it also goes back to comments that Richard Jackson made. Preparing communities for a future state, not dependent on the oil and gas industry, takes time and patience. certainly alienation of customary land for development is necessary for future development. And as I mentioned, people might envisage towns and economic hubs and markets and airstrips, but it's all contingent on the availability of state land that can be utilized to do that. Create opportunities for people to decide on what's best for them and to learn from other success stories, perhaps within our peers or in other projects, perhaps in the mining industry, and seeking broader engagement and cross-fertilization of ideas across our peers and other agencies. I think going back to the example that Larry was sharing yesterday about the Wonderland Agri Stock Limited is just supporting innovation and creativity around the area of sustainability planning. So all in all, again, sustainable development planning is a process. It's not a 2-minute instant noodle, and it takes time and patience, and you know, we accept that we will make mistakes, but we also learn and grow from that and be able to support our communities, build a future state that they envisage. With that, thank you very much for listening. Mtasol.